Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, it's February 6th, 2025. Today is day 489. This is also a weekly summary. I'm sorry I wasn't able to join those who met this morning. I was grateful to our staff, Destiny and Chris, who read out the update of the summary of notes of things that happened this last week. Tomorrow, I hope to tell you a little bit about what's happened today at the National Prayer Breakfast. I'll leave that for tomorrow's update. For now, after 489 days with the chaos that's being spewed day after day here in Washington, D.C., how do you accurately summarize and seek to understand what's happening in the Middle East? And what role specifically the American government plays in the ongoing efforts for a ceasefire to not only be sustained, but to be permanent, and whether or not the Israel-Hamas war might continue. The big news coming out of DC this week were the comments made by President Trump that the U.S. was taking over Gaza. That's a direct quote. On Tuesday, Trump declared that the United States should take over Gaza and turn it into, quote, the Riviera of the Middle East, end quote. He was speaking at a joint press conference after his meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump also reiterated his call for all of Palestinians from Gaza to be displaced into countries like Egypt and Jordan. However, by the very next day, officials from the White House were strongly backtracking. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, on Wednesday clarified Trump's remarks and said that he would not be sending funds to Gaza. This was yesterday, that the U.S. would not be paying for the reconstruction of Gaza, nor has the United States made any commitment to send troops there. Saudi Arabia said that it would not establish diplomatic relations with Israel, which is a long-term foreign policy goal, specifically of President Trump and his administration. So Saudi said they wouldn't enter into a normalization deal without the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. Previously, they were saying a pathway to a state, but now the establishment, that's a very, very important word, of an independent Palestinian state. Officials from Moscow and London reaffirmed the commitments of Palestinians to be allowed to stay on their land. Iran-backed militant groups, including Hamas, said that the plan would exacerbate regional tensions if Gazans were displaced. And in Israel, far-right leaders and settlers lauded the idea. The international community responded to the U.S. actions in the past few days. Thousands of Egyptians on Friday demonstrated against Trump's proposal for Egypt and Jordan to accept refugees from Gaza. This was a rare state-sanctioned protest at the Rafah border crossing. Palestinian President Abbas and senior Hamas officials issued statements. They rebuked the suggestion, the mere thought of it. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry reaffirmed its support for an independent Palestinian state. They issued a statement adding that the normalization of ties with Israel would depend on the creation of such a state. And China, Russia, the UK, France, Ireland, Spain, Turkey, and Australia expressed disapproval of Trump's Gaza proposals. I hosted a delegation that joined the International Religious Freedom Summit earlier this week. Vice President Vance was there. My understanding is he was added to the schedule. I don't know if that's true. I was asked about his speech. And when that happened, I said my experience and perception was absolutely that Vice President Vance gave lip service to international religious freedom and liberty for all. But the subtext of his message was very clear. It included deeply disturbing assumptions about the superiority of Christianity and the idea that only the right kind of people should have complete freedom and human rights. In fact, Vance advocated clearly for the superiority of Christians who supported Trump's agenda of America First at the exclusion of all who disagree. You can read more about Vance's speech and other responses, including mine, in the Religious News Services article that was about the International Religious Freedom Summit. Also this week, Trump signed a presidential memorandum restoring, quote, maximum pressure campaign, end quote, against Iran. There was also an executive order calling for the review of U.S. funding involved in the United Nations. On Tuesday, Netanyahu was welcomed to the White House. He was staying in a row house in D.C., and social media is full of pictures and videos of protesters who were advocating for Palestinian human rights. They stood outside the building with all kinds of noise-making devices, bullhorns, trumpets, people hollering. The protesters said that they were going to make so much noise that Netanyahu would not be able to sleep. They said he shouldn't be able to sleep until Palestinians have justice. King Abdullah of Jordan is set to meet with US President Trump on February 11th at the White House. And let's just talk for a minute about what happened in this Trump-Netanyahu meeting. So this was Tuesday. President Donald Trump said that he's not ruling out deploying U.S. troops. I just shared above, or previously that he later recanted. But what came out of that meeting was that he was not ruling out deploying U.S. troops to support the reconstruction of Gaza, that he envisions long-term U.S. ownership of the redevelopment of the territory. Initially, before the recantation, Trump said, we'll do what's necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that. He said, we'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons at the site. You look over the decades, it's all death in Gaza, Trump said. This has been happening for years. It's all death. If we can get a beautiful area to resettle people permanently in nice homes where they can be happy and not be shot at and not be killed and not be knifed to death, like what's happening in Gaza, seemingly forgetting the historic ties of people to that specific land. Tuesday night after the Netanyahu meeting, President Trump said that he was not taking a position about Israel's sovereignty over the West Bank, which is not insignificant. He said he'd be making an announcement on that in the coming weeks. He said, we're discussing annexation with many of your representatives. People do like the idea, but we haven't taken a position on it. The "you're" there presumptively is Israeli representatives. In terms of the two-state solution, Trump said it just means we want to give people a chance at life because the Gaza Strip has been a hellhole for people living there. Hamas has made it so bad, so dangerous. By doing what I recommend, we think will bring great peace long beyond this area. This is not just for Israel, it's for everyone, Arabs, Muslims, and everybody. There is so much chaos here in Washington, D.C. I'm trying to only highlight the things that are happening in the U.S. government that directly affect the Middle East. For example, the State Department fired about 60 contract workers that work on democracy, human rights, and labor. That's DRL. That is the department that monitors human rights violations around the world. Churches for Middle East Peace, we actually submit specific cases and incidents, not only related to religious freedom, but also related to human rights to DRL. Rumors also have been swirling that U.S. aid was going to be shut down. Trump agreed that it needs to be. Elon Musk announced this on X the following day. And then Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that he was taking over as the acting administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. They notified Congress that U.S. aid is currently under review pending potential reorganization. And I just heard some very disturbing news about the numbers of people from U.S. aid who will be let go in coming days. President Trump on Tuesday signed an executive order withdrawing the U.S. from the United Nations Human Rights Council and also from participating in UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Trump also directed the U.S. to review its participation in UNESCO, the body that uses culture and history as a bridge-building mechanism between nations. In addition, the Trump administration asked Congress to approve the transfer of roughly $1 billion worth of bombs and other military hardware to Israel. Over the weekend in the region, Israel and Hamas Saturday swapped 3 more hostages and 183 Palestinian prisoners were released. This was the 4th exchange under the ceasefire deal. The total of 183 prisoners and detainees, almost all of them were Palestinian. There was 1 Egyptian. 7 Palestinians were serving life sentences and an Egyptian was deported to Egypt. Of the remainder, 150 were sent to Gaza, 25 went into the occupied West Bank. The Guardian in the UK said that 72 had been convicted of the Israeli courts of the 183 released, while 111 were largely Palestinians and Gazans who'd been detained without trials after October 7th. One of the hostages, Yarden Babas, 35, was released, but the world is still waiting to learn the fate of his wife, Shiri Babas, and their sons, Ariel, 5, and Kiffer, 2. On Saturday, the 1st of February, The Forward, which is one of the U.S.'s most significant Jewish news outlets, reported that there's another hostage that no one is talking about. Her name is Elizabeth Cherkov, a Russian-Israeli graduate student at Princeton University. She was doing field research for her dissertation when militants from the Shia group Katabi Hezbollah snatched her from Baghdad. This was March 21st in 2023. Although her case has been overshadowed by the plight of the 240 hostages taken on October 7th, it's recently just come back into the headlines. On Thursday, a UK-based news outlet that covers Iran and Iraq reported that both Iraq and Lebanon have proposed swapping Surkov, who's now 38, for 7 Hezbollah fighters and a Lebanese naval captain who was captured during Israel's ground operation in Lebanon last fall. Israeli officials have not commented about this possibility. Elizabeth has been kept in captivity for 682 days. The Rafah border crossing reopened on Saturday. This was the first time in 9 months. 56 sick and wounded Gazans crossed into Egypt. We also have been talking about the role of Americans who, private contractors, not current U.S. military, were hired to facilitate the crossing of Palestinians heading north from the south of Gaza at the Netzarim. Israel news reports that about 100 armed Americans are a part of the group that is inspecting Palestinian vehicles headed to the north. The Americans there were to inspect weapons. This is a part of a consortium of American defense contractors. They're highly skilled ex-military, ex-CIA personnel who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan and have vast fighting experience. An Israeli strike on a vehicle in Gaza wounded at least 4 Palestinians on Sunday, medics said. The Israeli military said it fired on a suspicious vehicle. On Friday, the UN chief demanded the evacuation of 2,500 of children in Gaza who were named to be at imminent risk of death by doctors that had analyzed their health situations. Also over the weekend, Hebrew News and Israel reported that the UAE reached an agreement in principle with Israel, saying that it would take responsibility for Gaza after the war. The UAE is ready to rebuild Gaza in a way that ensures it poses no threat to Israel. Axios reported that the U.S. Middle East advisor, Steve Witkoff's visit last week to Gaza, that he had not discussed with Trump the idea of moving Palestinians. He said that from what he saw, Gaza is uninhabitable. There's nothing left standing, many unexploded ordinances. It's not safe to walk there. It's very dangerous. I wouldn't have known this without going there and inspecting, Witkoff said. Moving to the West Bank, Israeli troops said earlier this week that they plan on remaining in the Jenin refugee camp without any withdrawal. They said this after the large-scale raid they launched last week is complete. The defense minister of Israel, Katz, said on Wednesday that this 2-week incursion that Israeli troops would stay there. Hundreds of Israeli troops were backed by helicopters, drones, and armored vehicles. They've been fighting sporadic gun battles with Palestinian militants while carrying out searches in the streets and the alleyways for weapons and equipment. On Sunday in the West Bank, the Israeli military demolished at least 20 buildings in the occupied West Bank city of Jenin. According to the Israeli military, the dismantled buildings contained laboratories, weapons, and observation posts. There were no casualties reported, but other news sources said that many of those buildings destroyed were family homes. An attacker killed 2 Israeli soldiers and injured 8 others in an exchange of fire in the occupied West Bank on Tuesday. At that time, no group had claimed responsibility for the incident. And also, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, requested an emergency UN Security Council meeting in response to the IDF's counterterrorism operation in the West Bank. He said that Israel was destroying entire residential neighborhoods in the refugee camps in Jenin and Tulkarm. The IDF reported that it killed over 50 militants and arrested over 100 wanted people, confiscating weapons and destroying hundreds of explosive devices planted on roads since their counterterrorism operation in the West Bank began 2 weeks ago. They also said that 2 uninvolved civilians, a man and a girl, were killed during the operation. The Palestinian Health Ministry also announced that a 27-year-old was killed by IDF fire at the Al Arub refugee camp between Bethlehem and Hebron in the occupied West Bank. An international response, the Hague Group, which includes Belize, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Honduras, Malaysia, Namibia, Senegal, and South Africa committed to legal, economic, and diplomatic measures against Israel because of the state's actions in Gaza and other parts of the occupied Palestinian territories. A quick update on Hezbollah and Lebanon. Israel lodged a complaint to the US-led committee that oversees the ceasefire, saying that Iranian diplomats and others were delivering tens of millions of US dollars in cash to Hezbollah. And the Israeli military said on Friday of last week that it struck several Hezbollah targets overnight in the Bekaa Valley and along the Syrian-Lebanese border. Israel also said that they intercepted a drone that had been launched by Hezbollah, and they called it a breach of the ceasefire agreement. In Syria, the US military said it killed a senior operative of al-Qaeda that was affiliated in an airstrike on Syria. That was Thursday of last week. And there was a car bomb that killed at least 20 people in northern Syria on Monday. There were no immediate claims of responsibility for the attack. The Syrian interim president Ahmad al-Shara and Turkish President Erdogan are expected to discuss a bilateral defense pact. I didn't hear the readout of that meeting. Also, Syria's interim president al-Shara on Sunday went to Saudi Arabia. This was the first foreign trip of a Damascus rebel-led group to the country, which is quite significant. The Israeli military is building up multiple outposts on the Syrian territory, according to satellite imagery that was reviewed by U.S. news outlets. There are many things happening at Churches for Middle East Peace. I hope you'll go to our website to learn more about those. I leave on Sunday with some of our staff to head to Denver. We'll be heading out on a Pilgrimage to Peace tour. Please also consider joining us in Washington, D.C. for our Advocacy Summit on March 19th and 20th. I did want to let you know that the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America came under fire. One of the recipients of U.S. government funds, they were called out by General Mike Flynn. He posted on X that Lutherans cannot be trusted for they are a money laundering organization, hiding behind their faith. If that's not bad enough, Elon Musk retweeted the false accusations. And so pray for the ELCA and their leadership as they respond. I also wanted to let you know an update on Catholic Relief Services. That's one of CMEP's member coalition as well. CRS is breaking for massive cuts because of the draconian reductions in U.S. foreign assistance that have been ordered by the Trump administration, according to Sean Callahan, the president and CEO of Catholic Relief Services. Previously, their work in Gaza, they were the largest recipients of U.S. aid, doing really incredible work, responding to the humanitarian needs in the Gaza Strip. So pray for CRS, all the organizations cutting staff and programs because of Trump's recent executive orders. Pray for all of those who won't be receiving services because of the cuts as well, especially those throughout the Middle East. Continue to pray for peace and work towards justice. In the name of Christ, amen.